So you guys drove here today?
Yep.
Okay. Did you gas engine, diesel, electric?
Gas.
Okay. Why didn't you take a steam engine? And so if you look at the bullet technology and the design where it was and everything and the timeline of it, that's the same timeline. And so we had copper jacketed bullets at the end of the Civil War. We had hollow points end of the Civil War. You had center fire rifles end of the Civil War. So that's where that technology is. It has advanced to where it kind of peaked probably in the 90s or so, where there's not a lot of new stuff coming out in hollow points. The monolithics, there are some advancements there. But basically, you have a fairly slow projectile that just expands in caliber, but it keeps that roundish shape. Mm-hmm. And so, what you're doing is as shapes go through things, you have to get an amount of cast off, and so you can only get a rifle type wound at about 2,100 feet per second impact velocity and up. And at that point, then you are expanding tissue fast enough to enough degree, the elasticity is broken and you've gone beyond that. Now you've done damage. And so you're tearing blood vessels at that point. Below that speed, if you don't rub it and if you're not crushing it, you're not damaging it. And so a hollow point, you're putting, best case scenario, you're putting, say, a 70 caliber crush wound through that. These crush wounds aren't very effective because if you can imagine taking a very elastic, say, garden hose or something, and you pinch it down, it's going to kind of close those off. So there's not a lot of bleeding associated with that. If you have an archery wound, though, that cuts through there, those things, they bleed like crazy. And so what we're doing is the mechanism that it uses is we're using the cast off very similar to the way a water jet would cut through AR-500. So we're getting that liquefied tissue and blood to move at such a rate, and even when it hits bone, it creates secondaries. And so as a pistol round, we're creating secondaries at below that threshold of rifle speed. And so what we've done is we create, if you look at the front of our bullets, basically they look like a boat propeller is what we hear a lot. And so this boat propeller is shaped in a way that it casts things out. And so if you've ever washed a spoon and you have it face down and it goes under the water, the water will go around it. And that's what you have going on with a hollow point. Flip that spoon over and the whole kitchen gets wet. And that's what we have with the G9 technology.
That's a great analogy. So, okay, now, and that relies on the rotational energy of the bullet, right? How fast is a bullet rotating? Or no, maybe
no. Okay. And so what it does is ours has a spiral cut to it. And so one of two things, we're going to go against the rotation of the bullet quite a bit, and that's going to create a greater surface area for that boat propeller to be. So it's a bigger propeller in a smaller diameter. Or we'll go with it like our external hollow point. And the external hollow point is more like a water slide, really is what I'd have, because it loads on there and it's going with the rotation. I want that rotation to continue because I want straight penetration. Mm. People think that our bullets flip around, which they absolutely do not. I've seen, I don't know if it's hundreds, but it's a bunch of high speed, and I've never seen a bullet flip around until the end. It will go down to the end of the gel. The gel will spring it back. Every once in a while, it flips around backwards, but it's traveled straight forward. And so what we're trying to do is keep that tip forward for very straight penetration, because you're not shooting the target, you shoot the target within the target. And so 22s are famous for glancing off ribs or skulls. And we had a few shootings in Texas over a 5-day period that kind of introduced G9 to law enforcement. It was a major brand that they used through the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And they had, once these were shot through windshields, they became wholly ineffective. And it would pierce, one guy was shot in the head, it had pierced his skin, run around his skull, and then exited through the back of the head. So it looked like he got shot right through the skull. It never did anything to his skull. He continued the fight after that. And so that was disconcerting that the officer sees he gets a center hit on the head through the windshield, and nothing happens.
Okay, and that was a different brand.
It is.
And you guys have real life experiences?
Case studies, yeah.
Case studies. There you go.
Where
G9's been used.
Sure. We had a U.S. Marshals. It's a Lone Star Fugitive Task Force, and so they hunt career criminals that are known to be dangerous, and that's all they do. Those guys are using it a lot. And that was our first stuff that came out. And so with just who they were and what they're doing, we had a lot of skeptics in there, and some of those guys are good friends now because we've had enough phone calls back and forth, and that we actually have an office out of Texas, and so they've gotten to where they know us well and we're friends.
Yeah. Wow.
The first shooting, the guy in the office there got a phone call, and he was holding his 6-month-old baby, feeding her a bottle, saying, 6 hours ago, I was in a shooting. A guy's got a Glock, 3 feet from me, pointing at my chest, pressing on the trigger. I got my trigger to go off first, and he flopped to the ground. And so with a handgun, you don't get instantaneous. And that was a high thoracic, no central nervous system, high thoracic hit. And so we've had a multitude of these where you get a high thoracic hit, and they hit the ground, and they're done, they're out. And so it was an 18 Delta that told me he believes that not only is it's stopping the threat, because not only is there enough damage done that they're gonna die, but they faint at the same time. And so there's not this response. We see that deer hunting as well. We make a lot of hunting ammo, and I've seen these shapes that we're talking about. We actually went and gone to Africa several times and hunted with these same shapes that are in the pistol rounds in rifle stuff. And we have Cape buffalo that are known to be just a really tough animal. And we have 2 of them on video that got non-life-threatening hits on them from a not an extraordinarily large caliber, and they laid down on the spot. We've had the farthest any of them moved was 12 yards from the initial impact. And so that's ridiculous. They acted like they were spine hit, but they were nowhere near the spine, 5 inches from the spine, yet it was enough shock that it stunned them, and they laid down.
That's wild. I now know that I don't want to get shot with G9. Describe the bullet itself. What's it made out of?
So we use solid metal. So it's a copper alloy. Some of the designs so it's federally regulated to use brass and steel. And we do that, but then we have to be selling either overseas to the law enforcement or to military. And so everything that people are going to know us by is a copper alloy. And so on that, the machine that makes them is called a Swiss turn or a multi-spindle. But we're going to first cut the bullet, and we're going to cut a normal bullet shape. And then we come in with a ball end mill, and we scallop out 3 or 4 flutes, depending on what we're doing. And these flutes then channel fluid. And the channeling of the fluid, when we make that, we're making actually a tube, but we only make half the tube. And so if you look at the Venturi Effect, solids and liquids are incompressible. And so as you hit this at the speed, even the solids that we think of on a tissue become liquid. And so as it goes through, we're going to put it through these little areas, these little tubes now. And so we will increase the speed of it, because the Venturi Effect says that if you have a fat pipe and it goes to a skinny pipe, you're going to speed up to make it through because you can't compress it. So,
right.
And so what we've done is we've taken these tubes, and as it goes through, the other half of the tube is made by whatever we're shooting it to. So these jets come out. We're using a couple different things there. With the little bit of rotation that we have, we keep the fluid in the tube. And then from there, we actually have every design we have has a parabolic curve to it. And so if you were to take a ramp and you roll a marble down a flat ramp or one with a parabolic curve, you can get 37% faster on that parabolic curve. And so you drop the marble same time, it's going to come off. Well, it's traveled even more distance, but it's faster. And so what we're looking for is cast-off velocity. I want sideways, because when we shoot these things into gel, we will get it to come in at the same exact depth every time. Like you can bologna slice the gel and all the bullets are going to be there. And most hollow points are going to come in and they'll be 12 to 16 inches. They're going to have a 4-inch range on what they're doing. We come in at 18 every time. Our law enforcement military stuff go a little bit deeper because the newer studies, we have most of the civilian world stuck in the FBI protocol that is 12 to 18 inches. Law enforcement, international stuff, military, they're asking for deeper, because they understand that you guys don't know if you're old enough to know this, but did you grow up playing airsoft, paintball, or did you shoot each other with BB guns?
BB guns, yeah.
BB
I grew up in the 80s.
Yep. And so with BB guns, if you get 5 pumps on a BB gun, you shoot each other, it never penetrates the skin.
Right.
And so we calibrate gel with 5 pumps on a BB gun, 585 feet per second. It goes about 3.5 inches into the gel. There's a range that it can go with that BB. And so the gel is not an equation for tissue. And people think it is. Like, I don't want to shoot through 18 inches. Well, you're not going to. And they had, Texas just had one that's kind of interesting. There was a shooting where a guy was shot in the small of the back, did not hit his spine, did not hit his belt. It was through a t-shirt, and he was shot with a major brand hollow point, and none of them penetrated 5 inches.
Wow.
And so none of them were lethal. He was actually killed by the shots from the front from a different officer.
Back to the Castoff speed. So I'm trying to understand this. It basically, that Castoff is the own blood and tissue from the person, and that is causing the damage.
Sure.
Because it accelerates away.
Yeah.
Am I getting that right? Can you see that in ballistic gel, or does
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, it's a cool thing. We'll and if we get you guys out to the shop, we'll actually shoot it with you and dye it,
Yeah,
and you can see. And so what we'll get is typically on our 9mm, we're going to get somewhere between a 3 to 4 inch cross section cavity, permanent wound in gel. And so we're using ordnance gel. I don't like the synthetic. A synthetic is really hard to do the same thing time and time again. You can't really calibrate it. Ordnance gel is very consistent. And so we actually use pork gelatin, but you can see these. And so the 1980-ish FBI protocol for testing bullets, they went about it the wrong way. I think they asked the wrong question. And what they were asking was, I want to see what the bullet looks like. So they're going to measure how deep the bullet went, how much it expanded, and what it weighs at the end. They get scores based on those things. Well, what did the gel look like? Because after you shoot someone in law enforcement, are you digging the bullet out and putting on a necklace? Are you what are you doing with that bullet? The bullet matters. It's the wound that matters.
Right.
And so the JSOC went and they commissioned a place out of Houston, Texas to start doing testing a different way. And so they did it in gelatin. They did a lot of barriers, and they also used beef brisket. And then they didn't care what the bullet looked like. They cared what the wounds looked like. And so they started doing that. And when they did that, this test was done unbeknownst to us, and they called us because they're like, we have some of these rounds. And I'm like, well, you shouldn't, because that's some stuff that was given out to the military for testing. Well, we're testing for them. And so we developed this relationship. It's called Viper Weapons Training. They're out of Houston, and they're doing testing, but they're putting the emphasis on what it did. And so when we look at that, our 9mm, depending on the variety, get somewhere in the mid-teens to low 20s in cubic inches of wound. And that's significant because that gold dot we're talking about, the 124 plus P gold dot, if I remember right, gets 3.8 cubic inches.
Whoa.
And FMJ gets 2.2.
Whoa, that is a huge difference.
And so that FMJ can go, it will be in the 30-inch mark, but it is a sub-caliber wound. And so the tissue and everything will fold right back around on it. And that's what we see in a lot of these things.
Does a traditional hollow point have any Castoff as well, or is it a different function?
It will for a millisecond. And so as things open up, typically they get to a point where they have this really good shape, and then they fold back on themselves. And so and you'll see this in the gel, is that there's something around the 3-inch mark, usually 5-inch mark, somewhere in there, where you get this big plume, and then it goes back down small.
Okay.
And so there is a point.
I'm developing an image in my mind of this tiny little ball of hate that you created that hits and then just spurt like a water jet coming away from it.
Right.
Sure.
It's creating its own water jet, and it's just blasting everything.
Yeah. The shape of the wound is very similar to like a Coke bottle. And so it tapers off with speed. It's not totally linear, but the diameter of the wound will go down with speed. And so at the end, it tapers down. It's bigger at the front. There's a couple good things there, because inside a lab, we can create the perfect environment to test a hollow point. And these hollow points, if you're shooting bare gel and you're caring about what it looks like, then you start putting different fibers in front of it, and these hollow points start failing. And so then they put plastic and other things inside the tip of them to try to do that. Well, that creates new sets of issues. But what we're doing is inside the magazine, inside the barrel, in flight, ours is ready to go. It's the perfect cast-off shape. And if we can make it resilient enough that it goes through the barrier and still looks like that, that's something that is remarkable. I think that it works on contact, and we'll see the front of the gel will have a triangular shaped pattern where the gel on the first millimeter of being hit already starts cutting itself, and so the face of the gel will show these lines. And so we have what people talk about as zero neck. How long did it go in before it started working? Well, that magical 5-inch point or 4-inch point, whatever that is with a hollow point, if you figure it out, skin, they say, is between 3 to 4 inches of gel is where the skin is at. and the skin on the front side, the back side is different because you have one that is backed and one that is loose. So the backside works more like a catcher's mitt to catch things. Our bullets are low density. You get most coppers are coming in at about 9 grams per cubic centimeter. And so you add lead to that and they get up 11 to 14, depending on the ratio there on what the lead bullets are going to do. They have a better chance of popping through the skin on the backside given density. Our low density bullets typically don't pop through the skin.